Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Sorry for Rambling. I'm Alex Cack, and today I'm actually really honored to have you join me. This is Fred Karger, as a former candidate for President of the United States of America, and the first openly gay candidate for president, at least from a major party. Fred, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Alex. Nice to be on your show.
Nice to see you again. We were just talking. We met while you were running for president, which was surreal. I think you're the only active presidential candidate that I've ever met. You pulled in, I remember, to that carport, and it was the Fred Karger on the side of the whatever it was. Like, it was like a van or a bus or something. I remember, and I was thinking, like, is this an ad? And then you
Oh, that was
yeah, it
our
was the
campaign
big
bus.
bus. Yeah, and I thought it was like an ad on a city bus or something.
The big bus. Okay, that
And
right.
then yeah, and then
It was wrapped just like Mitt Romney's campaign bus, only a little smaller. Just like our campaign was a little smaller than his.
so I mean, I guess let's walk back, because you served in Reagan's White House, if I understand that. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I've always been on the outside of government. I was a political consultant. So what we did was to work on a lot of presidential campaigns, local, state, federal, you name it. And then we're very honored to be a part of his two presidential campaigns in 80 and 84. We ran his political action committee out of my consulting firm called the Dolphin Group. And his campaign, when it ended in 80, they had some extra money and they started up called Citizens for the Republic. So I'd worked on several projects for the president when he was president, but I actually never served. I've never served in government. We'd get him elected and then go off and try and get him reelected, or help other candidates along the way.
A process I'm familiar with.
Yes.
I've never done the policy side, but the campaign side is my bread and butter. Um, so, because you are you still a Republican? I think that's a question worth asking.
Well, as of mid-January, after 49 years, because when I was 21 was the age when I registered to vote. You couldn't register at 18. I switched to what we call in California no political party, meaning independent. And that was strictly so I could vote for Pete Buttigieg, who I was actively supporting in our primary, which I did get to do. And I am now an independent and going to stay here for a while.
It is there's something to be said about getting out of kind of the party preference kind of selection process, and being able to go back and forth. Not every state has open primaries. Do you think they all should?
I learned a lot when I ran for president. I've been involved in, that was my 10th presidential campaign I've been involved with, but never quite doing all the nitty gritty that we did in ours. And every state and territory has different rules as far as ballot access, who can vote, and it's ever changing too. California has changed about 10 times in the last 20 years. And so, in order to vote in a Democratic primary for president, you can do it as either a registered Democrat or a what we call no political party. The Republican Party will not allow no political party registrants to vote in their primary for president. So it's a little complicated, but you have to register as a Republican to vote in the Republican primary. Vote in the Democratic primary can be either independent or Democrat. So congressional races then are different, and it's all very complicated. And it's my business, so if I'm having trouble, imagine other voters. But I'm going to stay put, and I learned in other states how to get ballot access, who can vote. Michigan, for instance, which is coming up tomorrow, I was on that primary ballot. It's Romney versus Karger, mano a mano, and there Democrats can vote for anybody. So I appealed to Democrats. I headquartered myself in East Lansing, where Michigan State is, a pretty progressive congressional district. And my target there was to win one congressional district out of them all, and then I would have received delegates. That plan didn't work, but our strategy. And so it just shows that every state is very different on who can vote in presidential primaries, or some have caucuses. That gets even more complex.
It is a very complicated process, I think, throughout the nation, and there's a lot of confusion about both parties' kind of primary selection process. Do you think that that's okay, or do you think there should be kind of a standardization of that?
It's fine. It's worked. It served us well over all these years. States have that opportunity. I know Utah. I was on that ballot, and I think that's when I saw you. I was heading to Utah for the last primary in the nation in our campaign bus, which we called the California Express when I was on the California primary ballot, my home state, and then we had the back part taken off and called it the Utah Express. But that policy has just changed by nominating statewide offices. It used to be done by convention. Now it's done by primary ballot. So yes, I think that the states should be left to run the elections, and they have done a very good job. It's, of course, we've got to have to make sure that the federal government can oversee these elections to make sure our ballots aren't compromised, but I think it should be left to the states, and then they generally leave it to the counties and the county clerks to do the nitty gritty and all this. So as big a country as we are, democracy works, and I think we shouldn't fix it if it ain't broke.
um, so let's go back to your 2012 run. I mean, I think the first question is what inspired you to get involved in to run and to get involved in that primary. What was the decision making process like to run for president?
I'm in Laguna Beach, which is my residence, and it's been a long journey for me. So when I was 18 years old, I pretty much figured out I was gay, and I struggled with that for a number of years. Moved to California from Chicago, where I grew up, to kind of keep my secret. I was pretty successful at it, having been an actor briefly, so I could kind of act as I thought I needed to not lose my job, which I thought might be in jeopardy, not lose my, which I thought might be jeopardized. So about 41, I came out to family. It was a slow process. I'd come out to friends earlier. I'd always been gay. I had a partner throughout my 30s. And it was a long journey for me. But when I retired in 2003 from my political consulting firm, I decided didn't really matter anymore. So I came out publicly trying to save a gay bar right here in Laguna Beach. And that was really an equivalent of coming out. And I did it with great trepidation. I was scared. I was, 53 years old, but I still didn't know what people would think. And I'd been used to living this double life so long. I was just kind of had grown comfortable with that. So anyway, I decided, what the hell? And I came out and never looked back. And I did it primarily because I wanted to try and influence younger people that there are no more limitations, that you can do anything you want to do. And I got very involved in Proposition 8 out in California, which really kind of increased my profile. We went after a lot of the big donors who were trying to qualify and pass Prop 8. So now suddenly I'm a gay activist, and I knew that I had to continue this, and I didn't know what to do, but I thought I could run for office now that my deep dark secret was public. And where do I start? At that point, I was about 60 years old, or no, about 60 years old. And I decided, why not start at the top? That's what my grandmother always taught me. I could run for city council, the school board, but it was a long road up. So I decided to go right for the gold rings, and that was the presidency. There'd never been an openly gay presidential campaign candidate before in a major party. One ran in the 70s as a socialist, but nobody in either major party. And I thought it'd be funny and significant if the first openly gay candidate for president would be a Republican. That would be the last party that people would expect to have a candidate from. And I had assumed that Senator Tammy Baldwin, or somebody like David Cicilline, congressman, or any number of openly gay members of Congress would run first. But I decided to be that first candidate. And I had about a checklist of a dozen things, including how popular was Obama, who at that point in his first term was not doing well. He had not been great on LGBTQ issues. He kind of reluctantly went along with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He still hadn't come out and supported gay marriage. So I thought maybe I could get a little head of steam with the LGBT community, and just decided to do an exploratory trip, which I'm now in the 10th anniversary year. In February of 2010, I went to DC and New York and spent a week in New Hampshire testing the waters, which is actually the legal term when you're considering a run. And after my first night at the University of New Hampshire, speaking to the LGBT Gay Straight Alliance, about 40 kids sitting there mostly on the floor, were so inspired and in awe of what I was doing that I decided I had to proceed with this. And I campaigned full time, nonstop for the next 2.5 years until that last Utah primary in the very end of June of 2012.
I think you surprised a lot of people with how well your campaign did with young people too. I remember watching those videos, and it was the Fred Who video with the frisbees on college campuses, and that was a very fun ad, and I think it made a really good point about the fact that you had not been getting the media attention that the other candidates had, and yet you were still there. You were putting in the work, and you were attracting voters. Do you see young people as an important part of Republican presidential politics? Do you think that there's still an avenue for young people's voices over in that party? And how should future Republican candidates go about approaching them?
Well, the Republican Party, of course, very different. Another reason about the 12 I had checklist to run was that the Republican Party had moved so far right. And don't forget, this was long before Donald Trump, 2 cycles before. So it had still moved, way to the right. I grew up in Illinois. I worked for Senator Charles Percy, Nelson Rockefeller, and his presidential campaigns when I was a teenager. So I'm a political junkie, and I always did it because I love these moderate Republicans. They were leaders, as was George Romney, Mitt's father, the governor of Michigan, in the Black civil rights movement when the Democratic Party was on the other side. These were, Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms, people like that, who were fighting civil rights. So I identified with the Republican Party. I came from a moderate family, and that party has that part of the party has left. So I thought as the only moderate, as the only pro-choice Republican running in 2012, pro-gay marriage at that time, although two of my opponents, Gary Johnson and John Huntsman, joined that for Obama and Hillary Clinton and supported marriage equality. But I thought the party needed a voice of reason, and that was another reason I ran. As far as the younger people go, Ron Paul was running that year as well, and he would turn out just like Bernie, these armies of young people. And I remember in Michigan, speaking to the law school there, to a law school class, actually, I don't know, a couple hundred people. He had already people camped out. He was coming that night, and he had, I think, 20,000 or something at one of those huge arenas at the University of Michigan. So depending on the message and the messenger, the Republican Party can recapture younger people if it has the right candidates. And just as a little sidebar, when I got started in California politics, I joined the Young Republicans in 1976 when I was volunteering on a race for United States Senate candidate Bob Finch, another big moderate Republican. And we had two factions in the Young Republicans, and we worked very hard to bring younger people in. We even would go to the college campuses recruiting students. You want to legalize marijuana, join the Young Republicans. So we're very progressive on social issues. And so this was right after Watergate, and we nearly got thrown out of these campuses with the Republican booth we'd set up. But then Reagan comes along, 4 years later, and completely transformed the Republican Party. I mean, it was way worse than it is now after the Nixon impeachment and resignation and or near impeachment. And so I have hope that this is a cyclical thing with the two parties, and maybe when there's a successor to Trump next year, that things could change very drastically when 2024 rolls around, and the younger people can come back to the Republican Party. But we're losing them by the millions, and it's sad. One of the reasons I ran was to bring younger people not just into my party at the time, but to the political process. We did voter registration campaigns online and at a lot of schools. I advocated for an amendment to allow 16 or 17-year-olds to vote. I think be encouraged while they're in high school. And that was very controversial, but I believe in at least exploring that. So I ran as someone to bring younger people in, to excite them, to have access to them going into their colleges and high schools speaking. And I thought that was good for the process. And it was good for the Karger campaign. I'm sure if we'd had the money and really dissected the votes we'd gotten in those 6 states where we competed, a lot of those would have been from younger people.
And that is, I mean, that is an incredibly interesting point, though, is the cyclical nature. And I mean, especially with young voters, young voters are not a static voting block. They change every, 4 years. Who is a young voter changes, it's generationally changes. There's of course, the side of that, which is that you being the first openly gay presidential candidate, you laid a lot of the groundwork for Pete Buttigieg's campaign. I feel like that, which you endorsed, as you said, this year. How have you seen the role that LGBTQ people play in politics in both parties? How has that changed since you ran for president?
Well, it was interesting. I'd been very active on Prop 8 and then discovered the Mormon Church's involvement, turned it over to the Wall Street Journal, went after 4 of the biggest donors to the Prop 8 campaign, boycotted their businesses very successfully, got a huge amount of national press, even an editorial in the New York Times commending me for doing that. And so I was pretty well received with LGBTQ leaders. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? All of a sudden, he's the bad boy in politics. As kind of the radical going after these organizations. I didn't really fit the stereotype of a gay activist. I wore a blue suit and tie quite often, but they liked me. They were a little curious about who I was. So, of course, when my big fear was when I came out as a Republican, when I decided to run for president, how they would react. Interestingly enough, the LGBT media, which was, of course, even a lot stronger at the time, this was 10 years ago, could not have been more supportive. I think I had earned my points with them. The leadership, activists, the Human Rights Campaign, the task force, the Victory Fund, which is solely responsible for supporting openly LGBTQ candidates, not only sat out my race, but was actually harmful to me. Met with them many times. Chuck Wolf, who was running it, was spreading a lot of bad rumors about me, and it was a terrible situation for me because I counted on a little support. Where I did get some support were some of the people who got it, who saw me on Rachel Maddow or interviewed by Dave Ross, and saw this guy, maybe Republican, but he's progressive. He's got a great message. And how important is that for younger people? And that was the primary reason I ran. Was, as I started to say earlier, I really struggled with my sexuality, particularly as a kid. I didn't face the dire consequences that so many do with suicides, attempted suicides, thoughts of suicide. But I had zero self-esteem. I was ever conscious of my sexuality and trying to cover it up. So it was not a happy life. And I had hoped by running for president, being that first openly gay candidate from a major party, and especially the Republican Party, to send that message to younger people. Wore a lapel pin every single day of that campaign for 2.5 years that had a rainbow flag on it, subtle, but had a rainbow flag next to the American flag. And every commercial, and thank you for your kind words. That was the Sexy Frisbee commercial, it was called. We did for California. We did Demon Frisbee in New Hampshire about a year and a half later, which was a great spot. And it was kind of, people thought it was a flying saucer. Everybody was scared. And it was kind of I grabbed the flying saucer, which turned out to be one of the Frisbees that we gave away, tens of thousands, to tell people, don't be afraid of a gay candidate. And that was well received too. They're all up on YouTube, and we did about 20 of these very innovative commercials, most of which ran in the states we were competing in. But it's a tough battle, and I get it. And of course, it's a lot worse now with Trump. But the Republican Party had just led the charge against all these anti-gay marriage initiatives everywhere. So I was trying to right the ship a little bit and and bring that civility back and bring also some moderates back and also let the Republican Party know, which I was very effective in doing, that there are gay people within its ranks and that we're reasonable people and respect us and talk to us. And I spoke, dozens and dozens and dozens of Republican county central committees, state parties, you name it. And most people hadn't heard of me, but I would do what I call drop the gay bomb. I'd say, I'm the first to run commercials. I was the first to file. I was the first to campaign in New Hampshire. I'm the first openly gay candidate. And I love what I call to watch the reaction, particularly from these Republican groups that were tend to skew a little older when I dropped the gay bomb. And I noticed it was interesting that nobody reacted. It was whatever expression they had when I said that I was the first public candidate, they kind of froze in that expression, digesting it all. But then when the program ended, and I was speaking with Romney on the same podium, Huntsman, Santorum, you name it, the cattle call, a lot of people would come up to me, kind of quietly look around a little bit, and then when they realized they were alone, they say, "Hey, my son is gay. What should I do?" Or since I remember in New Hampshire, my husband's gay. What should I do? And I said, "Well, married? Oh yeah, we're still married. Best friends." I should have gotten my therapist license probably, but through email, through Facebook messages, you name it, I got so many people opening up to me, asking me questions about things. And then, those are people who came forward. And I just hope and I know through the kind of messages I got and reaction whenever I do an appearance, and particularly on a larger audience, it was on MSNBC all the time, a lot of international coverage. What those people, what that Fred Young, 12-year-old Fred Karger in Illinois is thinking when he sees an openly gay candidate running for president. And that's, Alex, what kept me motivated and kept me going in this thing, got me up in the morning to do this very, very uphill battle. And I got so many people that came forward and told me how it impacted their life. Whether it's just a chance meeting, with a campaign bus, or just the fact that I was out there running was significant. So I'm very pleased with what we did, and did it for a hell of a long time because we did it on a shoestring budget. Always never went into debt. I had about a $40,000 a month budget. We had staff, we had surveys, we had direct mail, we had great commercials where I spent a lot of money, a lot of travel, and I vowed never to do something unless I could pay for it. And we ended up in the black at the end of that 2.5 year period. Unlike some of my opponents who had millions of dollars in debts and left a lot of people out there, a lot of their staff, volunteers, holding on to credit card debt and everything, and they didn't reimburse for, which I think is unconscionable. But I'm very proud of what we did, and no regrets.
I mean, I think you should be proud of what you did. I think you definitely earned your place in American history, and in a way that very, very few people are probably ever going to get to say. There is something
Not a lot of us. It's you.
Watching the campaign in 2012, you mentioned Gary Johnson earlier. Obviously, he left. I think he saw that he didn't have a lane to win the nomination. He joined a third party. Was there ever a moment where you thought of doing the same thing?
Gary Johnson and I became close. I've always been a big fan of his, and we had dinner early on. And, I understand his move, and it was a smart move, and it was particularly smarter, I think, in 2016. I think, and I was helping him a little bit. Had he done a few of these things I was recommending, I think it would have been a very different outcome to the election. But no, I don't blame him. The Republican Party, a lot of people have left. California, where I live, our party here is decimated. Every year I worked in politics for my 40 years, registration would go up in both parties. And now the independents, the no political party registrants tend to almost outnumber Republicans. So many have left. So what we have are the reasonable people, the more moderate Republicans have walked away, and they mostly move into the no political party status. So Gary was smart. He tapped into that with the Libertarian Party, which, was tailor-made for a good candidate like him to get. I think they're on the ballot in all 50 states, which states have really devised, or the two parties have devised the systems to keep third parties out, other than the Libertarian and some of the smaller parties. That's why Bloomberg, I think, obviously switched and became a Democrat. He'd hoped to run as an independent, and with that kind of money, he could have gotten on ballot, but decided to go the more traditional route. It's tough to win in a third party. You can disrupt things, you can get attention, you can get in debates. We've seen it over time, but you have to have a lot of money, and it's a difficult process. But I sad to see Gary Johnson go, and hopefully he'll come back. Maybe he has as a Republican, because we need those agents of change within the Republican Party.
You know, have you ever considered running for office again, be it third party or as a Republican?
Of course, after this exhausting 2.5 years, I mean, I was my own campaign manager as well, and wrote everything we did everything the big campaigns did, and so I was pretty exhausted, and I was so excited to get my life back. I'd retired. I was very much interested in getting out of my suit and tie and back into my shorts and flip flops in Laguna. But when when Trump was elected, and I was watching that closely, of course, I thought, gee, that might be kind of interesting to challenge him, because while the country hasn't heard of me, New Hampshire and Iowa voters had. I spent most of those 2.5 years in those two states, and I was kind of the media darling that Pete was this last cycle nationally. I was in New Hampshire because they're desperate for candidates running for president. And actually, Iowa was just Rick Santorum and I for about the first year. And New Hampshire, I pretty much had that to myself. So, yeah, I thought about going back to New Hampshire, maybe making some waves. And then one of my other political heroes, former Governor Weld of Massachusetts, got into it with way better credentials, who was, of course, Gary Johnson's vice president as a libertarian in 2016 as vice presidential candidate. So I figure, well, we're in great hands with somebody like Governor Weld taking on Donald Trump. So that was my momentary lapse of thinking maybe I should get back into this again. And I wasn't really serious, but no, I did my part. What thrilled me was 13 months ago when I met Pete Buttigieg at this book signing he had in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Library. This relatively, or I guess an unknown mayor at the time from a small Midwestern city, thought I could get there and maybe, there'd be 25 people in the cold February night in Brooklyn. But boy, was I wrong. There were about 350 people packed the auditorium at the library. They had to turn around 50, 75 people away. And I was, of course, just so moved by him, his abilities, and the audience response to him that I was very happy to see not only another openly gay candidate run for president, but somebody, this rock star. And I spotted it then, got to meet him, talk to him, to his campaign manager, to his husband, Chasten. And he signed a book for me. We had a great exchange. He thanked me for paving the way for him, making it a little easier, making the pathway easier for him, being a trailblazer. He had nothing but wonderful things to say. So that night I endorsed him and sent him contribution for his exploratory committee, and became very, very active in his campaign. So, the fact that he was appreciative for my pioneering, which I'm sure he was watching closely 8 years ago, because this is somebody who has, I think, had this in his sights running for president for many, many years. I've not talked to him about it, but when you read his book, you can see that he lived his life to run for president. Maybe a little sooner, happened a little sooner than he planned. I did not live my life like that, which is I wrote my memoirs. I enjoyed life and never ever thought I could even run for school board. So I didn't live the kind of life that I think somebody running for president might live. But I wrote about it in my memoir called Fred Who, which was co-written by a very good friend of mine, Steve Pfeiffer, who's a renowned author, and it's a great read. Actually, it's a lot better than Pete's memoirs, a lot more entertaining. Crashing the Academy Awards and all the political campaigns and all that. And his is good, of course, but it's a lot on his job as mayor and his new sewer system, techniques and everything like that. So I highly recommend it. Fred Who, we're writing the working title now, Fred 2, Steve and I, which is almost done, about the historic campaign, which thanks to Pete, my campaign suddenly became relevant again, and get a lot of attention because of the question, was he the first? No, there was this guy who ran 8 years ago. And I did do a lot of interviews and very proud of that, and kind of resurrected our campaign from the dead.
It is interesting to see that discussion happen because I think for a lot of Americans, especially there's a lot of young Americans who weren't eligible to vote in 2012 at all. So that the candidates who weren't, Romney or Obama kind of fall by the wayside for them. And so it is interesting we connected again through a conversation like that with a young person who was saying, who's this Fred Karger guy? Well, he, before you could vote, he was this guy who was on the ballot. But it's a legitimate legacy that you have. And where can people find the book?
So it's on Amazon. Just Google Fred Karger. It's Karger, Fred Who, and it's a great read. A lot of pictures. I'm writing another book, a third book called The World's Greatest Crasher, which will be coming out soon too, because I have that distinction, which some considered. And actually, my first big break was the Washington Post, giant profile when Dan Zach, the reporter, came up to New Hampshire for 3 days and covered our campaign early on, which, are you quite ready for the Washington Post to be traveling with you in the same car for 3 days and get to see the good and the bad and everything in between? So that story came out great, but he kind of termed it as crashing the presidential campaign primaries, which is what I did. And, the kind of somebody who was not expected to run. I hadn't served as governor like most other candidates I was running against, or Speaker of the House, or U.S. Senator. So it was a kind of a unique undertaking. And I'm glad we were able to pull it off and do it again. And then, what's kind of interesting in that question, Alex, is, I thought that was it. My campaign's done. Somebody like Tammy Baldwin or David Cicilline, I mentioned, somebody like that would kind of come next and be like one of the 24 Democrats that ran. I didn't think it would be this rock star like Pete. But what happened then as a result of that, and some I think was intentional, other mostly unintentional, was that as journalists would report on his campaign, they would always term him the first openly gay presidential candidate. Because like you said, and the first one was a young reporter with the Des Moines Register, and no paper covered me more than the Des Moines Register did during my 2.5 years. I was a regular feature there, but I think she was in high school or something when I ran and was unaware. And so I sent her an email and asked if she'd please fix that, and very apologetic, and fixed it within minutes on a Saturday. And I thought that might be it. Well, that was the start of what I call the correction campaign. And it really started in earnest with the New York Times. And this, I don't think, was necessarily innocent, because a couple of those journalists who were saying that were either at another news organization or had covered my campaign back in 2000, from 10 to 12. So I'm convinced there was an effort, because I ran as a Republican, not because people don't like me or something, but because of the terrible brand I ran on, that they didn't want that title to go to a Republican. So I think there was a concerted effort by a lot of journalists to erase my historic campaign. Well, anybody who knows me knows I'm not going to just sit by and let that happen. We had a lot invested in that campaign, and I was not going to be, thrown to the curb because people didn't like the party I ran in. And I ran in that party against all odds. And, this was 10 years ago, before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, before there was even the hint of a federal gay marriage law. So it was a very difficult battle. But as I said, I ran in a party that needed to see what an openly gay candidate looked like. So I brought on a couple friends to help me with this, and we had a lot of Google alerts going, and then people tipping us off. And whenever we would see that error reported, New York Times, we actually had 4 separate occasions where they had called Pete the first openly gay major party candidate. And guess what? All 4 times, with some persistence, they corrected it. And Washington Post, you name it, all the major news organizations. And as I say, some I think was intentional, most were not. Many of these journalists just didn't, were doing it quickly. But we did get that corrected. That got me a lot of press coverage on this correction campaign, a wonderful Politico video. And, most of what we would do is be very courteous about it. We understand there's confusion with all Pete's attention and 8 years is an eternity in politics, but please issue a correction. And so we would do it privately. We get emails or we'd phone a lot of the newspapers or internationally, whatever we would do to find people down through LinkedIn. We had kind of a little checklist of things we would do to try and access journalists, which is not so easy these days. And I would say we got about a 95% success rate. And we always took the nice approach. When they refused, I would go public with it and to Twitter or other social media outlets. And when they really refused, like the Associated Press, which really kind of peeved me because the journalist, guy named Tom Beaumont, who had been with the Des Moines Register, was now with the Associated Press, wrote this story. Well, he knew me very, very well. So I called him on his cell phone. He was very apologetic. And he said, I thought I might hear from you. I had the story written correctly. My editors changed it. So here's who you need to talk to. So that started about a 2-week battle. And I won't mention the name, but it was a very high-ranking official of the Associated Press. I had a lawyer letter already for this instance because I anticipated this. So I have a very, very top political lawyer in California who I've used for 40 plus years. And we had this letter ready to go. Well, after I made my appeal, had all the evidence, it's unrefutable. And they still, after they made the decision that, nope, I was a joke or I was frivolous and they were not going to count this. Even though I appeared on 6 ballots, thousands and thousands of news stories. And so they still wanted to take that away from me. So the lawyer letter is ready. I sent one more appeal and copied my attorney in the email. And I heard from this gentleman who said that they would fix that story. And I had a full-on campaign ready to go. And I would, and again, anybody who knows me, it's not an idle threat. I was going to announce that I will take this to the highest court in the land if they refuse to correct this. And the Associated Press, of course, that story was all over the world. And so, other journalists looked to that. And so we drew our line in the sand and they acquiesced and they fixed the story. And we put together something because, people like him who revered journalists. He's actually on the board of the Pulitzer Prize. So you would think that he would want accurate journalism. We put together what we call our top 200 list. And it's hard to narrow down. I was going to do a top 100, and then we ended up going to 200. And so it's up on BuzzFeed, and it's interesting. And so what we did, Kevin Miniter was my campaign deputy with me for the 2.5 years, did a little bit of everything along with our kind of lean, mean crew, put this together, and it's great. It's very interactive. It's got videos, it's got news coverage, it's got stuff from 2019 on Pete and me, but mostly it's from our campaign, a lot of the interviews. And we would send that as a part of our little packet to journalists when they would, report incorrectly that Pete was the first. And, those who kind of demeaned my campaign said it wasn't serious. And of course, a lot of people were unaware of it, and I completely get it. But if you look at this top 200 list, and you can Google Fred Karger top 200 list BuzzFeed and see that. And it's up on our I guess I'm not sure where it is, but it's on my Facebook page. We have it's called Truth Squad 2020, which was what I launched in order to set the record straight and kind of separate from me doing it, this Truth Squad 2020. And these 200 campaign moments really are impressive. If you look at even the first 10, after David Frost interviewing me, something that Pete Buttigieg, the one thing I have up on Pete Buttigieg, you can never get a David Frost interview, which was kind of surreal for me. The same journalist who interviewed Richard Nixon, the first one after his resignation, it was a huge deal. There's the Frost-Nixon movie, but here I'm sitting in Sacramento. David Frost is interviewing me from London and even asking me if I would consider Sarah Palin as a running mate. So a lot of people, certainly at the time, took me very seriously. And that top 200 list was to inform journalists that this was not a joke. And it led to a tremendous amount of press coverage. A lot of stories involving Pete would give me that shout out and still. And so I'm back on now. Pete is doing a lot more appearances and everything. So I'm this morning. I've already reached out to another couple of journalists who had it wrong to set the record straight. So my candidacy will not be erased. And I think certainly all the major news organizations are well aware now. These are just some of the smaller ones, blogs that I'm reaching out to. And thank you, Alex, for having me on. And this is just what I'm hoping to do, is to let people know that before Pete, who really was so incredible as a candidate, it's hard for me to get excited about anybody else after how great a candidate he was. At least they're aware that there was someone before him and that it was a Republican against all odds, and that's important that we keep our history accurate.
I mean, it's important. I think you're in many ways. It's almost like you're in a fight for your own your own legacy and for the accuracy of how we talk about American history and gay American history, which is, I think, really important. One last question, because you just touched on this. With Pete out of the race, are you planning on publicly endorsing anyone? Do you know who you're planning on voting for? Now that Pete has suspended his campaign?
I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, definitely. I certainly like Biden a lot more than Bernie, but I think I'm going to sit the rest of the 2020 presidential campaign out. I've got a couple other projects I'm working on. These two books I mentioned. I'm trying to get a docu-series made. So my plate is pretty full, and I'm retired and supposed to be, fishing and things like that. But I'm going to probably sit this one out. We'll see what happens. But I was just, and as I watch Bernie and Biden and Trump, and I harken back to Pete, somebody who just, I saw many times and got to know. And I just so impressed with that guy that it's hard. He's a hard act to follow. And I think a lot of us on the campaign was even on a Biden call last week. They're trying to get a lot of us, because I became what we call a bundler. I never thought I'd become a bundler. I was actually a very successful fundraiser, much more than I was for my own campaign, for Pete's campaign, and on a post committee for events in LA. And it was actually easy, which is unusual in campaign fundraising, but people loved him and his message. And so it's important, I think, that he stay active, and I think it makes it difficult for those of us who are really on the inside of that campaign, I think, to go elsewhere. So, I certainly will follow his lead and recommendation probably, but time will tell on just how active.
Well, I'm sure it's not the last we've seen of him. I certainly hope it's not the last we've seen of you either. And thank you so much for coming on and doing this today. It was honestly, it's a real honor to have you on here and to meet you for the second time.
Well, thanks. I
Thank you
enjoyed
so
it.
much.
Thanks, Alex.